Destruction doesn't always come with fire. It doesn't need blood. It doesn't need raised voices, public scandals, or revenge plots. Sometimes the most devastating form of destruction is the one no one sees, not because it's hidden, but because it's calculated. This is what Machiavelli understood better than any man of his time, that to destroy someone completely, you don't confront them head-on. You make them unravel themselves. You don't throw punches. You give them room to speak. You don't attack their position. You elevate it just enough for the fall to be spectacular. The moment you react, you enter their game. And reaction is weakness. But when you refuse to react, when you remain still while they thrash, mock, provoke, and perform, you starve them, not of attention, but of oxygen. And without oxygen, their fire dies. Here's how it works. Someone insults you. Someone disrespects you. Someone undermines you in front of others. Most people would respond with retaliation, words, emotion, defensiveness. But Machiavelli would smile, because he knew true control begins where reaction ends. The goal is not to fight. The goal is to position yourself so precisely, so calmly, so unmoved that every move they make becomes a mirror, and they end up exposing themselves while you say nothing. This is your first weapon. Stillness. Stillness isn't passivity. Stillness is a form of dominance that confuses your enemy. They expect noise. They expect heat. They want you to get emotional so they can point and say, "See, look how unstable they are." But when you don't give them that, they start looking unstable themselves. The more they talk, the more desperate they seem. The more they explain, the more guilty they appear. The more they provoke, the more irrelevant their position becomes. Because the moment someone starts trying to convince others of their power, they've already lost it. This is what Machiavelli weaponized: perception. He didn't need to out-argue his enemies. He let them argue with themselves in public, in confusion, in desperation, until their credibility collapsed. And when the dust settled, he wasn't just standing. He was elevated. Now, here's how you take that same strategy and apply it with brutal precision. Let someone insult you in front of others. Don't flinch. Don't respond. Don't even blink. Instead, pause, then calmly look at them. Not with anger, not with surprise, just observe them. Let the silence stretch a few seconds too long. Let the discomfort build around their words, then change the subject. Speak to someone else. Continue as if they hadn't spoken at all. You've now reframed the entire room. They expected a battle. You gave them a non-event. And in that moment, you sent the most Machiavellian signal of all. You are not important enough to disturb my peace. The crowd sees this. Even if they don't understand what happened, they feel it. Something shifted. You didn't escalate. You didn't fold. You didn't ask for validation. You owned the silence. And in that silence, they began to shrink. Because here's the secret. Most people don't want to defeat you. They want to control the narrative around you. They want to make you look weak, feel humiliated, appear unbalanced. So you flip the script. You give them nothing to work with. And everything they say begins to echo back on themselves. Let them talk. Let them explain. Let them rant, accuse, point fingers, while you move with cold composure. Behind the scenes, you start doing real damage. You withdraw access. You take away information. You stop including them in conversations that matter. You remove your energy, your presence, your approval. No grand announcement, no message sent, just subtraction. And what's left behind is a person spinning with no one to spin with. They'll panic. They'll try harder to provoke. They'll raise the volume. And the louder they get, the more foolish they look, because you're not even playing anymore. Machiavelli understood the power of letting the enemy keep speaking, not to respond, but to expose themselves. You don't need to defend. You let the crowd draw their own conclusion. Because in the court of public perception, whoever looks least in control loses the war, even if they win the battle. And that's what this is, not a single strike, but a war of image, of framing, of psychological leverage. You don't destroy them with force. You destroy them with contrast. You stay calm. They unravel. You speak slowly. They stutter. You move on. They obsess. And eventually, everyone around them begins to realize they are not a threat. They are a warning. Not because of what you said, but because of what you never had to say at all. Destruction without attack is not a tactic. It's a philosophy, a way of moving through conflict so that your power isn't displayed, it's felt. Because anyone can lash out, but only those with control can collapse someone without touching them. This is the second layer of Machiavellian strategy. Weaponize their need for attention. Your enemy craves reaction, not because they're strong, but because they're hollow. Disrespect, provocation, slander, these aren't signs of power. They're signs of starvation, emotional starvation, social starvation, a desperation to matter at your expense. So when they target you, it's not about you, it's about trying to siphon your energy, your name, your reputation, your spotlight. And here's how you destroy them without attack. You let them chase your shadow until they collapse. You say nothing, you do nothing, and you move forward, publicly, privately, powerfully. You keep building, you keep creating. You stay focused on your mission, not their noise. And what happens? They look smaller with every attempt. They begin to look obsessed, unstable, insecure. You've shifted the story from you versus them to them chasing you. And nothing looks more powerless than that. This is Machiavelli's brilliance. He understood that attention is leverage. And once you know someone wants it more than you do, you control them. You create silence around them. You stop mentioning their name. You never speak ill of them, not because you're moral, but because you're strategic. Every time they speak about you and you say nothing, their voice begins to echo. People start to notice, asking why they are always talking about you, why they are so focused on someone who isn't even engaging, wondering if something is wrong with them. Doubt sets in. And in Machiavellian terms, doubt is decay. Because once their image becomes questionable, everything they say starts to lose value. And that's when you strike, not with aggression, but with contrast. You show up composed, dressed sharply, speaking calmly, delivering value, unbothered, unfazed, and unreactive, while they stumble, rant, and cling to relevance by dragging your name. And without you lifting a finger, the gap grows. They wanted to damage you, but in trying to do so, they exposed how much you matter, and how little they do without you. That's how you destroy someone without attack. You become the proof of their irrelevance. Now, there's another layer, one deeper, one they never see coming. Because not everyone will attack you publicly. Some will work behind the scenes. They'll smile to your face and sow doubt in private. They'll frame your actions as selfish, your success as undeserved, your intentions as toxic. These enemies are not looking for war. They're looking for erosion. Slow, silent sabotage. And this is where most people fail. They try to defend themselves to everyone. They try to correct the narrative. But the more you explain, the more you validate the existence of the rumor. Machiavelli would never do that. He would leverage the attacker's own behavior to set the trap. So here's what you do. You become more visible, not less. You elevate your name through actions. You perform with excellence in front of the very people they whisper to. You speak clearly in meetings. You make bold, intelligent moves in public. You show consistency, integrity, composure, without ever mentioning their name. Why? Because you're letting the observers compare you to the story being told. And when the story doesn't match your presence, the storyteller becomes the liar. That's the collapse. And you didn't have to expose them. They exposed themselves by betting on your silence to mean guilt. But your silence was never weakness. It was setup. You were letting them build the rope, and now they're hanging from it. This is the ultimate form of psychological destruction. You don't need them to lose. You just need them to lose you. You exit their orbit, you move without them, and you let their obsession rot in the dark. They try to destroy you by dragging you down. Instead, they've trapped themselves in a cage of their own bitterness while you ascend. And everyone sees it, because power never needs to shout. It just needs to remain standing. Destruction, when done right, doesn't look like an explosion. It looks like silence around a name that used to matter. It looks like the absence of acknowledgement, the evaporation of attention, the subtle withdrawal of power that no one can point to directly, but everyone can feel. That's why Machiavelli never taught men to go to war first. He taught them to become so indispensable, so visible, so undeniably competent, that anyone who tried to destroy them would instead destroy themselves. This is your third weapon, exposure through contrast. You don't attack someone's character. You simply live in a way that contradicts everything they say about you. If they say you're arrogant, be calm, thoughtful, generous. If they say you're incompetent, deliver results with cold precision. If they say you're manipulative, be transparent, consistent, and controlled in public. You're not defending yourself. You're letting your existence do the work. Because the more they speak and the more you act in direct opposition to their words, the more isolated they become. People start noticing the gap. They start questioning the narrative. And in time, they stop listening to the accuser, not because you denied them, but because you never even acknowledged them. That's where the real damage is done. Not in public humiliation, but in social irrelevance. Now let's go deeper, because some enemies are more dangerous than loudmouths or rumor spreaders. Some enemies are calculated. They won't insult you directly. They'll align themselves subtly as your competition. They'll mimic your moves, match your tone, mirror your network. They won't attack you with insults. They'll try to steal your space. This is where most people panic. They feel their position threatened, their identity copied, their voice diluted. But Machiavelli knew, when someone imitates you, they're not threatening you. They're trapped by you. They're admitting that your blueprint is stronger than anything they could build themselves. And so, instead of attacking them, you accelerate, you evolve. You shift the terrain so fast that by the time they replicate one version of you, you've already become someone else. You become uncatchable, unpredictable. They keep chasing your shadow while you're playing a game they'll never understand. And slowly, painfully, they realize they don't have the engine, they only have the echo. This is how you destroy someone who wants to become you. You raise your standard. You diversify your influence. You sharpen your voice. You leave no version of yourself behind long enough for them to catch. And you never mention their name. Because if you acknowledge them, you imply competition. If you ignore them, you reinforce the truth. There was never a race. Now let's address the final type. The enemy who thinks they're superior. The one who underestimates you, who looks down on you, who believes they're untouchable. These are the easiest to destroy, not with confrontation, but with position. You wait, you observe, you listen carefully to how they talk when they think you're beneath them, and then you build, not to prove anything, not to seek revenge, but because nothing devastates the prideful more than being outclassed by someone they dismissed. You don't challenge their throne. You build a better one next to it. And when people start turning their heads your way, when attention begins to shift, when their words no longer move the room like they used to, that's when the collapse begins. Because ego is fragile, and the proud don't know how to exist without applause. The day the applause fades, they implode from the inside. And you never lifted a sword. You never spoke against them. You never tried to take what they had. You simply became someone they could no longer deny, and someone they'll never reach again. That's how you win, without noise, without blood, without attack, by becoming the proof that they were never strong to begin with. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to an enemy is simply continue winning, continue growing, continue building in silence while their obsession with your downfall becomes their identity. Because what Machiavelli understood, and what most never realize, is this: the most complete destruction is not physical, reputational, or even social. It's existential. You don't just outmaneuver someone. You make their attempts irrelevant. You turn their attacks into a form of comedy. You exist so far above their strategy that even when they land a hit, no one notices because everyone's eyes are already somewhere else, on you. And here's how you create that. You stop trying to win battles, and you start owning frames. A battle is personal, emotional, temporary. A frame is psychological, social, permanent. So what is a frame? It's the unspoken truth people believe about you, whether you say anything or not. And you control it through your tone, your presence, your pattern of response, and your unwillingness to ever play small. If someone attacks you and you respond, they control the frame. If someone mocks you and you defend yourself, they control the frame. If someone undermines you and you rush to repair the damage, you've entered their world. But if you stay silent, if you keep moving like the attack never touched you, if your body language remains anchored while theirs becomes anxious, performative, scattered, you've just rewritten the frame. Now you're no longer someone reacting to slander. You're someone so unshakable it makes your enemy look unstable for even bringing your name up. And once that happens, their credibility dies. Slowly, publicly, and worst of all, by their own hand. You didn't need to discredit them. They did it themselves while trying to wound you. Now let's go one layer deeper. Destruction, Machiavellian style, is not about taking power. It's about making sure they never recover it. And that means hitting them where they aren't aware they're vulnerable, their sense of identity. The final move? You make it look like they were never a threat to begin with. How? You change your posture toward them. You stop speaking of them as an enemy. You speak of them, if at all, like a non-issue. You remove emotion. You remove history. You even remove recognition. And when others bring them up, you say things like, "I haven't thought about them in a while," or "hope they're doing well," or "not sure what they're up to," or express that you have no hard feelings and have moved on. You don't say it with bitterness. You say it with disinterest. Because nothing is more psychologically humiliating than someone who tried to destroy you and then learns they didn't even make the final cut in your story. Their attacks weren't memorable. Their words weren't damaging. Their presence wasn't defining. They weren't your rival. They were a lesson. And when others hear you speak that way, not with malice, but with gentle indifference, they don't just respect you, they pity your enemy. That's the final collapse. Not losing power, losing meaning. And there's no coming back from that. Because now the people who once watched the conflict unfold are now watching you rise and watching them vanish, all without one direct strike. You never attacked. You never stooped down. You never chased revenge. You simply made them realize that trying to destroy you wasn't just futile, it was the very thing that destroyed them. This is the final movement, the silent crescendo. You've resisted the urge to attack. You've denied them the validation of your outrage. You've stayed present, powerful, composed, and now there's only one thing left to do: disappear. Not in defeat, but in victory, so complete, so untouchable, that your enemy begins to wonder if they imagined the war altogether. Because destruction without attack isn't just about collapsing someone publicly. It's about removing the oxygen of relevance until they suffocate in your silence. And silence, when wielded by the powerful, is not absence. It's dominion. Machiavelli knew. The most feared men weren't those who fought every battle. They were the ones you offended once and never got a second chance with. Because their revenge wasn't noise. It was exclusion. They didn't slam doors. They simply stopped opening them. That's your final weapon. You do not send a message. You become the message. You show up at higher levels. You move in better rooms. You align with people who've never even heard of your rival. You operate in a frequency they can't reach, can't understand, can't infiltrate. You stop being a player on the same field. You become a different sport, and that's what breaks them. Because they thought the game was status, you made it legacy. They thought the game was image. You made it impact. They thought it was about being louder. You showed that true power is felt in your absence. And now the people who once watched you closely, they've started watching you quietly. They don't comment. They observe. They try to understand the principle behind your moves because something in them knows. You didn't just survive the attempt to destroy you. You used it. You let it polish you. You let it clarify you. You let it expose who was never supposed to be near you in the first place. Because sometimes your enemies aren't there to stop you. They're there to reveal who you are when no one is clapping, when your reputation is under pressure, when your name is dragged into rooms you never entered, when you're spoken about in a tone laced with envy, fear, or insecurity, and you say nothing. You don't panic. You don't defend. You don't flinch. You just grow louder by doing more. You dominate by choosing what to ignore. You destroy by never stepping into the mud. And in the end, they're left with nothing. Because the audience they try to impress is now following you. The circle they once controlled is now orbiting your ideas. And the story they tried to write has been replaced by your silence, which echoes longer than any speech ever could. That is Machiavellian destruction. Not with blood, not with scandal, but with precision, invisibility, and transcendence. You are no longer someone they can damage, because you've made yourself someone they can't reach.